Imagine being locked in a completely empty room for 50 days, with no phones, no books, nothing. It's just you and your partner for $5 million. Would you survive? This is the story of how a young couple steps into a white chamber, cut off from the outside world, with only one rule: if they could last 50 days, the prize money is theirs. What they didn't know was that the room holds hidden secrets that can break their trust, and that this so-called simple challenge will become a chilling test of their sanity and human survival.
It's over, Kate.
You can't leave.
As the movie begins, we are informed that a popular professor of psychology, Dr. Voyan, has just developed a psychological experiment unlike any other. The rules are simple yet strict. A couple must remain inside a spotless, white room for 50 days. If they are able to endure, they walk away with $5 million, but if either one leaves, the reward falls to $1 million. There is no outside contact, no entertainment, and no distractions beyond one another. The only devices present in the room are a glowing red button by the door and a digital clock above which counts down every second. One of the first couples chosen is Mike and Kate. To them, it seems like easy money, and while Mike believes their fortune has finally arrived, Kate views it as a second chance to rebuild their lives together. She imagines investing her share of the money wisely to ensure security for years to come. Mike, however, sees the prize as freedom from responsibility and desires to engage in carefree indulgence at the end of the 50 days. Meanwhile, as they step into the room, they find that the room is as sterile as its name suggests, completely white, with only a bed, a bench, and a minimal bathroom they are permitted to use one at a time. Meals arrive in the form of flavorless white shakes, calculated to provide every nutrient but devoid of taste. The only variation comes from treats, which were optional luxuries they can purchase by deducting from their final prize. Lights automatically shift from morning to night, regulating their sleep schedule, while a touchscreen doubles as their only tool for any kind of requests and setting alarms. On their first night, Mike attempts to turn their confinement into a moment of intimacy, but Kate is worried about possible hidden surveillance in the room. However, when he persists, she eventually agrees to do it under the covers. The next morning, Kate starts her routine by reciting affirmations in the bathroom mirror before showering, as their clothing is taken through a chute and returned as plain, colored pajamas which were functional, but equally devoid of personality. As the clock ticks on, time inside the room quickly starts to stretch thin as Kate starts to think about possible reasons for Voyan's motives. However, Mike recalls seeing a documentary about one of Voyan's earlier experiments, which ended in tragedy for a working-class family. But at the moment, nobody truly understands why the doctor funds such trials. All they know is that he is a wealthy individual that is deeply fascinated by the fragility of human nature. Meanwhile, having nothing other than themselves to pass their days, boredom starts to creep in sooner than expected. Kate continues to meditate daily, determined to preserve her mental clarity, while Mike starts to wonder if time is moving at all. He even starts to analyze the symbolism of white walls through his knowledge of arts, as he questions why their choices are restricted, and even starts to debate the proper technique for brushing teeth. But as the hours crawl by, the loneliness presses heavier on them, and the experiment begins to test not just their patience, but their relationship as well. However, Kate constantly reminds Mike not to stare at the countdown clock, as she urges him to focus on the reward instead. But he couldn't sleep, as the silence of the room makes it difficult for Mike to remain optimistic. Despite all these, Kate maintains her strict routine, affirmations in the mirror, making the bed, and meditating to keep her spirits steady. She also tries to uplift Mike's spirits, but he struggles, and to distract himself, Mike takes up running in circles, while together they play games like hand clapping, Marco Polo, and even dancing to nothing but the sound of their own voices. Weeks pass without change, until one day when Mike spots a tiny bug that has slipped into the room. He is overjoyed by the sight as he cradles it carefully, even attempting to feed it drops of his shake. That is when the voice prompt immediately intervenes, and it warns them that their food is strictly for human consumption only. Afraid the insect won't survive inside the room, Mike wanted to find a way to let it out, though he insisted that he doesn't want to leave. However, Kate reminds him that the voice only speaks one way and that it won't give him a reply. Frustrated, Mike considers pressing the red button to open the door, and thus immediately sparks a fierce argument between them as Kate insists that touching the button will forfeit their prize. As their temper continues to rise, Mike accuses Kate of lacking compassion, and she counters with a sharp attack of her own. She tells him that she believes that Mike's veganism is nothing other than a rebellion against his wealthy father who had only given him everything and helped him live free of struggles. Despite her words, Mike tells her that his lifestyle is filled with empathy for others, and as Kate walks away, she accidentally steps on the bug and kills it. Though she apologizes and claims it was unintentional, Mike doubts her sincerity, and he withdraws in silence and remains in the corner for the rest of the day. Days later, Mike eventually breaks. The loneliness becomes unbearable for him, and he decides to request a treat, despite the fact that one will cost $100,000 from their potential prize. Even though Kate disapproves of this, Mike goes through with it, and shockingly, what he gets is a single green crayon. But this was more than enough for him, as it reignites his creativity. So, he begins to draw across the stark white walls, finally finding some escape from the isolation. Kate watches for a while and then eventually asks him to sketch her. Mike agrees to do it, but when Kate asks him to make it realistic, he insists on his own abstract style. Disappointed by this, Kate loses interest and walks off as their already fragile bond strains further. By the time the crayon wears down, boredom kicks in again as Mike starts littering the room and the bathroom with green smudges. This infuriates Kate, who later apologizes to Mike, as she admits that the mission has been far harder than she had anticipated. However, the two find some comfort in the fact that they have only 20 days left. This tedious lifestyle drags on, day after day, until something unexpected shatters the routine. One morning, Kate enters the bathroom and freezes as she immediately calls for Mike, who is also shocked at what they saw. There is a gun on the sink. The sight of the weapons unsettles them both, and being too afraid to check if it is loaded, they decide to hide it under the bed as the prompt voice tells them that non-clothing items are prohibited from the laundry chute. And although the intended use of the weapon remains unclear to them, they try to continue with their routine. Eventually, the two get rewarded with Connect Time, which grants them access to video messages from loved ones. Mike receives a message from his sister, who cheerfully updates him on their parents, as she also casually remarks that she believed Mike was no longer with Kate. Although the statement leaves him somewhat unsettled, the glimpse of a familiar face fills him with joy. Kate, however, reacts very differently when her video begins, showing her father, who tells her that he is finally off the streets and now in a homeless shelter. Overcome with panic, Kate begs for the screen to turn off, and when it doesn't, she goes round the corner of the room to hide her face and cry. That night, Kate clings to Mike desperately as she sleeps. Then the following morning, when the lights announce the start of a new day, she refuses to rise. She is filled with shame as she eventually tells Mike that she had not seen her father in years and had always lied about him. Her childhood had been ruined by his alcoholism, leaving her feeling resentful and embarrassed, and that she had chosen to hide the truth out of fear of what people would say to her. Now, with just over 2 weeks remaining, Kate's depression worsens and she barely moves from bed while Mike struggles to fill the silence. He experiments with his crayon art, smudging it into new forms, or entertains himself by reading the tags on their pajamas in exaggerated tones like an acting exercise. He even jokes about their bland meals, trying to coax Kate into eating, but his efforts fail. Sometimes, he lies beside her, hoping his presence might help, while other times, he sleeps on the floor just to break the repeated actions. Then, one morning as his patience starts to wear out, he urges Kate to consider taking a treat, but she refuses as she is unwilling to sacrifice part of her prize money. However, when Mike admits he doesn't know if he can endure much longer, the words finally stir Kate into action as she rises from bed with the intent to shower, but not before telling him to take his second treat, even though it will cost them $250,000 this time. Mike agrees, and as he presses the request button, the door opens, and a young woman named Simone, who is completely naked, enters the room. When asked who she is, she tells them that she is an actress who had been hired for a mysterious project, and that she had been required to sign endless non-disclosure agreements. Though she was booked for a month, her agent suggested she would only remain for a single day. When Kate hears this, she immediately resents her presence and forces Mike to hand over his t-shirt to cover Simone. Eventually, she notices Mike's drawings on the walls and praises his artistic influences, and it further sparks Kate's jealousy. That night, Mike offers to sleep on the floor while the women take the bed, but Simone insists she can stay awake and watch over them instead. However, Kate, who is once more annoyed by the courtesy, declares they should all share the bed, with herself in the middle. Yet, as the lights dim, it is Kate who lies awake, unable to sleep. By morning, Kate notices Simone is no longer beside them in bed and assumes she has left. But when she goes to the bathroom, she finds that Simone is still very much with them. This made her feel totally weighed down by the stress of the past few days as she decides to take a treat for herself. What she receives is a small box containing 3 brightly colored candies. She immediately eats one, offers one to Simone, who eventually convinces Mike to take the last after his hesitation. The effects are immediate as they all become ecstatic and filled with energy as the 3 begin dancing wildly, flailing their arms and laughing. At one point, they even share playful group kisses. But the joy does not last. Soon, Mike goes into a terrifying hallucination as his vision becomes distorted, and he sees blood pooling up on his bed. Suddenly, he falls into a pool of water, where he watches his younger brother drowning beside him. The panic immediately overwhelms him, and he starts to scream to leave the room until both women rush to calm him, and eventually drag him back to bed as he finally collapses into sleep. While he slept, Simone asked Kate about Mike's story. So, Kate tells her that Mike once had a younger brother, Sean, who had drowned in the family pool while Mike was supposed to be babysitting him. And that had happened because Mike had been high at the time, which is something that had magnified his guilt and explains his reluctance to take the candy earlier. Then Kate tells her how she and Mike first met. It was on a rainy day and she was outside without an umbrella, when Mike had jokingly offered to catch raindrops for her so she wouldn't get wet. This eventually lightens their mood, and when Mike wakes, Simone tells him about her own grief of how she had lost her mother as a child. As they talk, the two start to bond over their shared experiences of loss as Simone takes his hand to offer some comfort. But Kate happened to approach at that moment, and when she sees this, her jealousy ignites once more as she accuses Simone of trying to steal her boyfriend. But Simone counters as she points out that she believes Kate's anger is rooted in insecurity. Unable to bear them further, Mike shouts for them to stop as he walks away from them. Kate eventually attempts to apologize, admitting that she may have misinterpreted what she saw. But Simone was sarcastic in her reply, as if to suggest that Kate was right after all. And by the next morning, Simone is gone. But there was a message on the wall for Kate. It was a thank you to Mike for a wild night. The words send Kate into a frenzy as she once again attacks Mike, who insists that it is just another trick by the room, just like the sudden appearance of the gun. But Kate refuses to believe him, and in her rage, she pushes him to the floor, causing his head to slam on the wall as he starts to bleed. Totally shocked by her reaction, Mike immediately pulls away from her as he starts to remind her of all the sacrifices he has made for their relationship, like turning down his wealthy friends, abandoning college, and even staying by her side through her darkest days. He stressed that he has never betrayed her, yet her jealousy has always continued to consume their relationship. On hearing this, Kate breaks down in tears and apologizes repeatedly, but the damage is done. And as Mike starts to feel dizzy, he tells her that he needs to see a doctor. But even at this, Kate reminds him of the contract that there will be no medical help. Desperate to keep him in the room for the remaining few days, she brings him one of the shakes to hydrate him as she presses a towel to his wound. Although Mike eventually finds that his wound is minor and the bleeding eventually stops, he begins to question whether Kate truly cares for him, as his mind begins to wonder if his injury had been worse, would she have let him die for the prize money? Eventually, he discovers that the experiment has revealed who they really are, and has shown gaps in their relationship that money cannot mend. So, Mike makes a decision to leave the room. But when he urged Kate to come with him, she refused. To her, his decision is easy as he had grown up with financial security, while she has had to struggle for everything. And when Mike insists on leaving with or without her, she retrieves the gun and threatens him, as she is determined to hold on until the end. But Mike has made up his mind as he presses the red button and exits the Immaculate Room. Now left alone, Kate collapses into despair as she spends hours lying motionless, crying in the shower, and staring at the walls. Then, her eyes fall on Mike's drawing of raindrops on the wall, with a reference to the memory of how the two met. With only 2 days left, she approaches the button and contemplates her choices. Months later, we see Mike, who is now fully recovered, jogging when he unexpectedly crosses paths with Kate, who was stepping out of a building. The two eventually stop to chat, and as they walk away, they catch up after all this time. When Mike asks if she had been able to complete the challenge, Kate avoids the question, and rather apologizes for what happened between them. And as the two walk off, we see that the building she came out from is the homeless shelter where her dad is, and that its new kitchen is funded by an anonymous donor. And by the end of the movie, we see a new couple stepping into the Immaculate Room to take up the new challenge that awaits them in order to win $5 million. And that is the recap of the movie, Immaculate Room. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more movie recaps like this on this channel, leave a comment for us and also drop a like on the video. Thanks for watching.